The Glass House. The Seattle rain painted silver streaks down the vast windows of Alexander Reed's lakeside mansion. At 42, he had built Horizon Technologies into a multi-billion-dollar empire, yet couldn't bridge the 5 feet of space between himself and his 8-year-old daughter Sophie, who sat silently at the breakfast table, pushing cereal around her bowl. "I've arranged for someone to help with Sophie while I'm traveling next week," Alexander said, his voice carefully modulated as he scrolled through emails on his tablet. Sophie didn't look up. 15 months since the accident that took her mother, and words between them had become scarce treasures. Buried beneath grief, neither knew how to excavate. "She'll be here at 10, he added. When no response came, he sighed and retreated to his home office, where spreadsheets and projections made sense in ways his daughter's silence never would. Diane, his executive assistant, appeared in the doorway an hour later. "Mr. Reed, Miss Chen has arrived." Alexander had expected another polished, efficient professional with impeccable credentials. What he got was Nora Chen, 34, dressed in a moss-green sweater with mismatched buttons, her dark hair escaping its loose braid, carrying a worn leather satchel instead of a briefcase. "Your home feels like a museum," were her first words after introductions. "Beautiful, but too afraid of fingerprints." Alexander stiffened. "We value order here." "Children need to make messes to grow," Nora replied, her eyes, amber-flecked and unnervingly direct, meeting his. "That's in my references, too, along with my teaching degree and child psychology background." Something in her quiet confidence stopped him from dismissing her outright. "Sophie is withdrawn. She hasn't adjusted well since her mother's passing." Nora's expression softened. "Neither have you." The observation, delivered without judgment, still felt like a blade between his ribs. "My adjustment isn't relevant. I need someone to care for Sophie while I manage my company." "Everything parents feel is relevant to their children," Nora said. "But I understand the parameters of the job. May I meet her now?" They found Sophie in the sunroom, drawing with precise, careful strokes, circles and lines that never strayed beyond invisible boundaries she'd set for herself. "Sophie, this is Miss Chen. She'll be staying with us for a while." Sophie glanced up briefly, then returned to her drawing without a word. Instead of the awkward attempts at engagement Alexander had witnessed from previous caretakers, Nora simply sat on the floor nearby and began unpacking items from her satchel: a small wooden kaleidoscope, a jar of colored pencils, and a notebook with a fabric cover. "I'm going to draw too, if that's okay," Nora said, not waiting for permission as she selected a blue pencil. Alexander watched, fascinated despite himself, as his daughter's eyes flickered sideways, catching glimpses of Nora's creation. "I should get back to work," he said finally. Nora nodded without looking up. "We'll be fine, Mr. Reed." From his office, he found himself checking the security feed more than once. By lunchtime, Sophie had edged closer to examine Nora's drawing, a whimsical scene of a girl building a tower from raindrops. "Impossible," he heard Sophie whisper, her first word in days. "Most magic starts as impossible," Nora replied, offering a purple pencil. "Until someone tries anyway." As Alexander watched his daughter hesitantly accept the pencil, something tight and painful in his chest loosened ever so slightly, like ice beginning a long, reluctant thaw. Wildflowers in winter. 3 weeks into Nora's tenure, Alexander found himself lingering in doorways, watching her with Sophie. The girl who barely spoke now hummed softly as they worked on projects that transformed the sterile perfection of the house into something lived in. This morning he discovered the kitchen island covered with soil and small pots. "Indoor garden," Nora explained when she noticed him standing there. "Sophie's learning about resilience through plants that bloom in unlikely seasons." Sophie looked up, dirt smudged across her cheek. "Miss Chen says wildflowers can grow even in winter if they have the right care." The metaphor wasn't lost on Alexander. He approached cautiously, as if the fragile moment might shatter under his footsteps. "What are you planning?" he asked. "Forget-me-nots," Sophie replied. "They were Mom's favorite." Alexander's breath caught. Yes, they were. Nora handed him a small pot. Would you like to plant one? Their fingers brushed during the exchange, sending an unexpected warmth up his arm. Alexander couldn't remember the last time he'd touched soil, probably as a boy in his grandmother's garden, before ambition and achievement became his only companions. I have calls scheduled, he said, setting the pot down. Disappointment flickered across Sophie's face before she lowered her gaze back to her planting. Nora held his eyes for a moment longer. The calls will wait. This moment won't. Something in her quiet challenge made him stay. He rolled up his sleeves and joined them, his expensive watch incongruous against the dark earth. Later that evening, Alexander found Nora in the library, shelving books they'd collected during an afternoon outing. You're good with her, he said. She's easy to be good with, Nora replied. She just needs someone to see her grief instead of trying to fix it. Alexander leaned against a bookcase. And what about my grief? Can that be seen without fixing too? The question surprised them both. Nora turned, moonlight from the windows illuminating half her face while leaving the other in shadow. Is that what you want, Alexander? For someone to witness it without trying to change it? His name in her mouth felt intimate, stripped of titles and expectations. I don't know what I want anymore. That's the most honest thing you've said since I arrived. As she reached past him for the top shelf, her sleeve pulled back, revealing a tattoo, a small constellation of stars along her wrist. Without thinking, he caught her hand, tracing the pattern with his thumb. Ursa Minor, she said softly, to remind me that even in darkness, there are fixed points to navigate by. Alexander released her hand, but remained close. I've forgotten how to navigate anything but boardrooms and balance sheets. Then perhaps it's time to learn again, Nora replied. For Sophie's sake, and maybe your own. The storm's whisper. The Seattle forecast had predicted rain, but not the violent windstorm that severed power lines and blocked roads around Lake Washington. Alexander canceled his weekend trip to Silicon Valley as trees crashed down across the private drive leading to their property. We're on backup generators, he informed Nora, finding her building a blanket fort with Sophie in the great room. But we're effectively isolated until emergency crews clear the roads. Then we'll have an adventure, Nora declared, stringing fairy lights across the interior of their creation. Sophie, should we invite your father to join our expedition? Sophie nodded, extending a tentative hand toward Alexander. You can be lookout for sea monsters, Dad. Dad. Not father or Alexander as she'd taken to calling him since Claire's death. The simple word cracked something open inside him. The storm's fury grew throughout the evening, rain lashing against windows and wind howling through the trees. When the generators finally failed near midnight, Alexander found himself navigating by candlelight to Sophie's room, only to find her bed empty. Panic seized him until he heard laughter from the master suite he rarely used anymore, preferring to sleep on the couch in his study. There he found them. Sophie curled against Nora on his bed, a storybook illuminated by flashlight between them. Sophie was afraid, Nora explained. I hope it's all right we came in here. The windows in my room were making scary noises, Sophie added. Like Mom when she was crying. Alexander felt the floor tilt beneath him at this revelation. Your mother cried? Sophie nodded. Sometimes when she thought I was sleeping. She said you were lost at sea, and she didn't know how to bring you home. He sank onto the edge of the bed, candlelight flickering across their faces. I didn't know. Can you stay with us? Sophie asked. I'm still a little scared. Alexander looked to Nora, who nodded almost imperceptibly. I'll stay, he said, settling atop the covers on Sophie's other side. Hours later, with Sophie asleep between them, Alexander whispered into the darkness. Claire was right. I was lost. Still am. Nora's hand found his across the sleeping child. But now you're looking for shore. That's the difference. When morning broke, the storm had passed. Alexander woke to find Sophie still sleeping, but Nora gone. He found her on the balcony, wrapped in a blanket, watching the sun break through dissipating clouds. Thank you, he said, joining her, for bringing her back to me, piece by piece. Nora turned to him, her face solemn. I should tell you something, Alexander. I didn't come here by accident. Claire and I met in a grief support group before she died. She worried about Sophie. And you, Broken Melodies. You knew my wife. Alexander's voice turned to ice. And you didn't think to mention this when I hired you? Nora pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. I tried to tell you during the interview, but you were so focused on credentials and references. So this was what? Some deathbed promise to fix her broken family? Bitterness seeped into every word. No, Nora said firmly. It was a connection that helped me recognize Sophie's pain because I've lived it. My brother died when I was 9. The same silent grief I saw in her. Alexander paced the balcony. Why did Claire need a support group? What wasn't she telling me? The same things you weren't telling her, Nora replied. That you were drowning in responsibilities, growing distant, working 80-hour weeks while your family became strangers. The truth landed like a physical blow. Alexander gripped the railing. I was building security for them, at the cost of presence. Claire understood your intentions were good, but don't tell me what my wife understood. He cut her off. You were a stranger she met in group therapy, and you were her husband, who became a stranger in their home. Nora stood firm, refusing to back down. She loved you, Alexander, even when she couldn't reach you. Inside, Sophie appeared in the doorway, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Are you fighting? The anger drained from Alexander as quickly as it had come. No, sweetheart. Just a grown-up discussion. That afternoon, while Sophie napped, Alexander found himself at Claire's piano in the music room, untouched since her death. The familiar photograph stood on top. Claire laughing as Sophie attempted to play, his own figure captured partially, already turning away toward some forgotten obligation. He heard Nora enter but didn't look up. I came to pack my things, she said quietly. Alexander pressed a key, the single note hanging between them. Claire used to play every evening. I told her I was listening from my office, but most times I was on calls only half hearing. It's not too late to listen now. To what? She's gone. He closed the piano lid. Nora approached, her reflection appearing in the polished wood surface. To the melody she left behind. Sophie plays, did you know? When You're Not Home. She remembers the songs Claire taught her. Alexander looked up sharply. She never told me. Because you never asked what she does when you're away. Nora paused. I recorded her once. Would you like to hear it? The simple recording on Nora's phone, Sophie's small fingers finding the notes to Claire de Lune, Claire's favorite, broke open the grief he'd locked away. For the first time since the funeral, Alexander wept, shoulders shaking as Nora's arms encircled him. I don't want you to go, he whispered against her shoulder. I don't want to go either, she replied. But this isn't just about us anymore. Sunrise Promises, the elementary school auditorium buzzed with anticipation as parents filled seats for the spring recital. Alexander sat in the front row, program clutched in his hands, Sophie Reed listed as the final performer. 6 months had passed since the storm. 6 months of learning to be present, of family dinners and weekend outings, of slowly renovating the glass house into a home where laughter echoed and messes were welcomed signs of life. 6 months of falling in love with Nora Chen, not just for how she loved Sophie, but for how she challenged him to become the man Claire had always believed he could be. Nervous, Nora whispered, taking the seat beside him. Terrified, he admitted. What if I'm not what she needs after her performance? What if I say the wrong thing? Nora's hand found his. You'll say exactly what's in your heart. That's all she's ever wanted. When Sophie's turn came, she approached the piano in her blue recital dress, the spotlight catching the wildflower barrette in her hair, forget-me-nots preserved in resin, a gift from Nora. This is for my mom, who taught me to play, Sophie announced, her voice steady in the hushed room. And for my dad, who learned to listen again. The piece began tentatively, Claire's favorite nocturne, but grew in confidence with each measure. Alexander watched his daughter's face transform with concentration and joy, seeing Claire in her expressions, her delicate hands across the keys. When the final note faded, He was the first on his feet, applauding through tears. Later, as they walked together across the school parking lot, Sophie between them holding both their hands, Alexander knew it was time. "I have something to ask you both," he said, kneeling to Sophie's level. "Something important." Sophie's eyes widened. "Are we getting a puppy?" Alexander laughed. "Maybe someday. But first," he turned to Nora. "I've been thinking about what makes a family. It's not the perfect house or financial security. It's showing up every day even when it's hard. It's building something together." He took Nora's hand. "You brought music back into our lives when all I heard was silence. You taught me that grief doesn't have to be the end of the story." From his pocket, he withdrew a small box with a ring inside. Not a diamond, but a circle of sapphires like forget-me-nots. "I'm asking if you'll stay, not as Sophie's caretaker, but as part of our family. All of it. The messy parts, the healing parts, the future we could build together." Nora's eyes glistened as Sophie bounced excitedly. "Please say yes. Dad's been practicing this speech for weeks. Has he now?" Nora smiled through tears. "In the mirror," Sophie confirmed solemnly. "I caught him," Alexander blushed. "So much for surprises." "The best surprise," Nora said, pulling them both into her embrace, "is discovering that hearts can heal and grow again, even after they've been broken." As the sun set behind them, casting long shadows across the pavement, Alexander realized that some shadows don't signify absence or loss. They simply show that something substantial is standing in the light, rooted firmly in place, ready to dance with whatever life brings next.